Welcome, and thank you for joining The Logic of It All with your host, Reverend Gary Essex Sprunger. Hello. Glad you could join in on the conversation. The last time together, we got into the barbaric way we treat one another. We label each other, and the only way we see each other is by the labels we give to categorize everybody. We've seen it disturbingly these days. Palestinian, Hamas or Jew, Ukrainian, Russian, Chinese or American, LGBTQ or straight. I'm sure there are more. Junior, senior, rich, poor. Total emphasis on the superficial labels we use for each other, when the common thread that unites us all is ignored. We are all God's created. We are all humans that are God's children. If it weren't for God, we wouldn't be here. Are we living on this magnificent earth to label one another, mistreat one another, kill each other? Logically, no. We are all children of God. And we've heard it before, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, ethnicity, nationality, rich or poor, sick or well, strong, weak, tall, short, male or female, we are all children of God. That is our label, the one we ignore generation after generation. This is a label that should be with us each moment of every day, in all circumstances. First and foremost, we are all children of God, from womb to tomb. Each one of us has a soul. Each one of us is therefore a sacred human being. That's what sanctity of life means. You've heard it before, the sanctity of life. And yet, we treat one another like dirt, using labels to justify why we have no respect for them, or harm another sacred soul, hindering them from reaching their Creator-given potential. As humans, we have the ability to create weapons to kill each other, and we have, generation upon generation. As humans, we also have the capability to help, heal, feed, clothe, guide, teach, encourage each other toward our Creator-given potential. There was a time when inspired voices from the pulpit called out the evil in this country for what it was. Evil by elitists and politics in many respects. Congregationalist pulpits led the way, criticizing the political party that wanted to keep slavery and its expansion into the developing West. They opposed President Lincoln, who issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 that freed the slaves. Most of the opposition was from racist whites and elitist landowners of the South, and the makeup of the parties differed from the South and North. Those who supported slavery had a condescending attitude toward those who were slaves, considered them less than human and needing care and guidance. After the Civil War, during the Reconstruction years, freed slaves were destitute, mistreated, not able to get employment, had no say in court, couldn't vote in southern states, passed black codes, laws prohibiting former slaves from serving on juries, testifying against whites, serving the state militia, and all the rest, from segregated drinking fountains, separate bathrooms, couldn't go to restaurants. And there were times when some churches and temples called out the evil treatment, and they got burned. The 1930s were difficult years for everybody. And since more than families of former slaves and slaves were affected and the nation was failing, something had to be done. It all began in a positive way with government programs that created jobs and paychecks, putting America to work, pulling us out of the Great Depression. That egotistical air of superiority continued, and that party, with promises that they were the ones who cared for them, groom them for their vote to keep their caring party in office so they could help them have a better life. And in doing so, replace their dependence on the plantation with dependence on the government. In the following administrations, that political party, which had fought the ending of slavery, created more programs, not so much to create jobs the way it was told, as they were to attract voters. The political rhetoric sounded like the programs and agencies created were there to help improve people's lives, when in reality the success was in making government bigger. It was a vicious trap that became nearly impossible to escape from, and all for their vote, with promises for more to come their way. And there are things being done now to attract younger voters, like a better than $7 trillion program to forgive student loans. There's a push for a younger voting age, and the reclassifying and easing restrictions of marijuana. And the epitome of this dominant, egotistical, elitist attitude toward those considered beneath them is seen in the open border policy encouraging illegal migration with promises of a better life here in America. And we see them. Homeless or in shelters, from streets to commandeered classrooms and hotels. And down the road, hints in political ease of citizenship being granted to them through amnesty. In D.C. right now, there's a push to allow illegal migrants, giving them the ability to vote. Little by little, it is happening. Free medical care, driver's licenses, money, and free drugs in some cities. Is that not a demeaning way to treat a sacred life just for votes? Remember how the language is being changed? Prostitutes are being called sex workers, and now illegal migrants are being called newcomers or a person without immigration documents. It's also, they say, dehumanizing to carry such labels as criminal or convict or felon. So use instead person seeking lawful status or person on parole. You can be in trouble for using the incorrect pronoun. Freedom of speech is under attack. It's becoming more difficult to raise your voice in opposition to current practices. Parents are shouted down and threatened, investigated if they question what's being taught their child in their taxpayer-paid schooling. And where are the voices of criticism from the pulpits that once criticized those who fought against ending slavery? In the 1960s, pulpits in the northern states helped lead the way for passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that was a lesson learned by the political elitist as to how effective an organized Christian community can be in getting changes made. In 2004, a Reverend Ed Baker preached an anti-war sermon 2 days before the 2004 presidential election, and his Pasadena church got embroiled in a lawsuit with the IRS, which disputed the church's tax-exempt status. And to this day, there is the threat for a church or temple to lose their tax-exempt status for speaking out with criticism of social ills and how people are being misled and mistreated. The tax laws say a religious organization cannot support any political campaign, and that law is being used as a threat to stifle any criticism against the actions of a political party's administration. But that law has not been enforced by that same political party. As we've seen on television, national figures of that party speaking in churches during election campaigns. Is that the reason pulpits are quiet about the demeaning welfare programs tying people up in dependence upon the government and their expected vote to keep that party in office? Is it because of the inequity in enforcing the law? Or are pulpits quiet because there's no quick and easy, foolproof scripture to use as criticism of the evil treatment keeping sacred lives, both citizens and illegal migrants, in their place and dependent on the political party to support them with government subsidies in exchange for their vote? There are no scriptures in the Judeo-Christian tradition that speaks directly to the treatment of people we see happening every day. You won't find it in the Bible. The Israelites didn't speak out against kings, which they believed were chosen by God. And the early Christians didn't speak out against the Roman emperors, mostly for fear of retaliatory death. Scriptures in the Bible are focused on human life being a condition of sin, guilt, and forgiveness. So how did the pulpits of the early 1800s attack and condemn slavery? If there is no easy scripture that spelled out the wrong, the evil, the sinfulness. It's a jump from being focused on the individual being sinful to society being sinful by looking the other way from seeing the misleading and mistreatment of people today. Or maybe it isn't our society that is the cause, and what's happening in society is a result of what our elected are doing that is affecting what is going on in our society. How then does Scripture address the way some people are being treated today as Scripture during the days of slavery? Scripture deals with the way to relate to another human one-to-one. There's no Christian Scripture that deals directly with the behavior of a nation. One would have to return to the Old Testament teachings to address issues between a people and the Egyptian king or pharaoh. But that can only be from a source we've identified in past episodes as words from the storytellers. We cannot use today's stories that were told by those with knowledge limited to myths, legends, superstition, and belief in mythological God. The stories of God's caring for the Israelites and wanting their release from Egypt, with God's displeasure backed up with many signs, and finally the death of Egypt's firstborn, and even that of the livestock, before the Israelites were allowed to leave, are only events generated by the storyteller sources. We cannot use from Scripture stories like that today, telling our Congress to free people from being enslaved to government handouts, or their firstborn will die. That's not Christian, nor logical at all. No, Old Testament stories cannot be used. The problem is, the teachings of Jesus are one-on-one parables. How an individual is to treat another individual. There's nothing in the parables for one against a group, especially one that is making directives affecting the behavior of a large portion of our society. How then is a Christian message relevant to those in power of our country? How can Christ's parables go beyond one-on-one? Perhaps that's the only way to go beyond one-on-one. How we each treat another person. We should be doing that every day, all the time. Following the best commandment as our guidance to the best way to treat others. It begins by placing us in the best relationship we can be with the Creator, our God. It's not rocket science. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And just as importantly, love your neighbor as yourself. And that second commandment is how we are to live, one-on-one. To paraphrase that commandment, we've heard in the King James translation of Matthew 7:12, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that is to be used against those who proclaim in their political ease They need help, and we are the only ones that can help them to a better way of life. Not one of us would want to be treated in ways we see every day in the news, living in the streets, in blankets or sleeping bags, under makeshift shelters, tents, cardboard, or being shuttled from one large space to another with hordes of others who are homeless. We live in a democracy where we vote to send representatives to be in our Congress of lawmakers to represent our views, our values. And that person we send has a moral obligation to be the one for us to be sure another person is treated the way we want to be treated. And if that person voted for, cannot, and does not carry out our wish that others should be treated as we want to be treated, then we vote for another person who will. Hopefully, we try each day in every hour to treat others as we want to be treated. And in the larger scale of how others are to be treated. By the majority of those in Congress, we expect them to treat others in large numbers the way we want to be treated. They should be of the same mind, to love your neighbor as yourself. And if they are not trying to live the ways of good conscience, then we must unite our soul-driven selves and in dedicated numbers make it clear by our voices and our votes that we are driven by the 11th commandment. We expect to be following the 10 commandments. And then in John 13:34, Jesus said, I give you another commandment. You must love one another as I have loved you. We live daily, loving our neighbor as ourselves, and collectively, nationally, we do unto others, and we would have them do unto us. We are to love one another. And that is our stand against the treatment of those in the ghettos, unsafe neighborhoods, and the entitlements to be on welfare generation after generation, becoming people from other countries, breaking the law to enter the United States with misleading promises who end up in homeless dependence on welfare handouts, like it has happened so many generations before them. The pattern is harming people from reaching their potential. Sacred humans stifled. Not one of us would like to be treated that way. Instead of handouts from our taxpayer-supported government, what is needed is for there to be a stop to the dumbing down of our public education system. And also real schooling, real training programs for real jobs. People need to be freed from the way current programs keep people dependent on the government. Prayerfully, not one of us wants to treat another one-on-one that way. We are to love one another. And we're losing that sight of the 11th commandment. Our places of worship are stuck on being sinful, full of guilt, and the need for forgiveness. That's pounded in our heads every Sunday, while ignoring what's been happening to so many over many years in our society. Too much attention to the individual needing to be forgiven for their sins, and so little to nothing about the quality of life keeping other selves in our society existing in hopelessness and empty promises. Our Christianity is in desperate need of a reformation to get our lives and the lives of others in the direction of helping lovingly to reach Creator-given potential. We need to love beyond the labels. More of that next time, which you are out of now, and the coffee's cold. Have a good rest of your day and sunshine tomorrow.
Thank you for following The Logic of It All and the Hope for a Christian Reformation. If you have followed since episode 1, you're welcome to the website, thelogicofitall.com. Join us again for much, much more in The Logic of It All.